all the weekly, continuous and yearly measurements I kind of copied from Bryan Johnson. So Bryan Johnson introduced me to the idea of multiple measurements. I already before began tracking my workouts and so on and so forth, but many of these devices I got particularly because of, well, Bryan Johnson. So first of all, I do track a little bit of health data with these two watches, the Galaxy Watch 4 as well as the Garmin Fenix 7S Pro. Both also have the functionality of ECG, and they also have the functionality of recording a snapshot. On the Galaxy Watch I do have a third-party app called Weltery, which allows me to sample my HRV during the day, and the same is true for, not with Weltery, but there is a native feature on the Garmin 7S Pro, Fenix 7S Pro, which allows you to also get your HRV during the day, which is called Snapshot. Health Snapshot is called the feature. Then additionally on here we have the respiratory rate, which is not found on here. On here what we have is blood pressure, which is not found on here. So these would be the continuous measurements I am taking. Now, in addition, I have weekly measurements and I have one yearly measurement. The yearly measurement is one blood draw. I then interpret the results with Inside Tracker, and so far I have only done one, and I also uploaded historic blood data to Inside Tracker. I don't know what platform Bryan Johnson uses, but I assume he also uses Inside Tracker. He just doesn't talk about them because they are, I think, kind of just the go-to for these kind of interpretation results. Even though Bryan talks about this algorithm that takes care of his health, well, this algorithm I think does not really exist as of now. It is just a combination of reading through papers and then taking a look at this and taking a look, basically plugging in all of these systems, and then he has kind of a working system for an algorithm that takes care of his health. But then this algorithm also does not really exist as in, okay, it's an app and it tells you what to do. Now, for the weekly measurements, now I am measuring a couple of things, and I have also cycled out a couple of things in order to reduce the time cost of these weekly measurements. Now, first of all, I am stepping on a scale, and the scale is a Garmin Index S2 as of now, which synchronizes my weight as well as my body composition to Garmin Connect. So I do wear a Garmin watch, and now I also have the weight synchronized, and also the weight is then used in order to calculate VO2 max, for example, properly. And is also synchronized to the user profile on the app, which is quite useful. Also the power to weight ratio needs kind of a current weight. Previously I used another body fat scale which did not connect to Garmin because Garmin only accepts kind of data from its own devices. The Galaxy Watch as well as the Garmin measure pulse, they measure, well, oxygen saturation, they measure a couple of other things which I now won't go into that much. Mostly I got the Garmin for tracking activities better, also for scheduling activities and also for respiratory rate, but mostly the main difference I wanted to see was the HRV, which the Galaxy Watch measures, I think, and also includes in its stress calculation, but it does not give you a readout of the HRV data. Now we go into the weekly measurements. I have a couple of things here. The first one is also something I do on a daily basis. Of course, I then also do it on a day on which I do the weekly measurements. The first one would be a Garmin BPM, Index BPM. I previously had the Omron Evolve, which is also a smart blood pressure monitor, but this also did not synchronize to Garmin. You can now but manually input the blood pressure data from an external device, and I did this for all of the records I had, which was hundreds of records, which took quite a little bit of time to manually input them into Garmin Connect, but now it is done. And so now whenever I take a measurement with this, it is synchronized via Wi-Fi. I am using my secondary phone, which is the camera phone, as a hotspot, and so I have connected these devices as it did not work with my Wi-Fi router. The same is true also for the Bluetooth. Now, one advantage additionally of the Wi-Fi functionality is that I don't have to use my phone in order to establish a Bluetooth connection in order to transmit the data, which I think is beneficial if I want to use my phone less. So I also take a blood pressure measurement on here. In addition, this device here, compared to the Omron Evolve I had before, allows you to record 3 measurements in a row. So as you turn on the device, then there is the option to either record now 1 measurement or also 3 measurements. Peter Attia mentioned on a podcast that you ideally should have 3 measurements and then take the average. So this is the 3 measurement, and then it begins to measure, but I probably will stop this now. In terms of the reliability, I found that it goes up and down a little bit more on this device compared to the Omron Evolve, so I don't really trust this data that much any longer. There is also the option to measure blood pressure on the Galaxy Watch, but it does not synchronize to Samsung Health, at least in my experience. It only stores its data in Samsung Health Monitor, which is a different app, which sometimes synchronizes to Samsung Health, but also sometimes it doesn't. The same is true for the ECG reports, which also synchronize to the Samsung Health app, not to the Samsung Health, but only to the Samsung Monitor app. So I do on the measurement day also take an ECG, which I don't do on a daily basis because it takes a little bit of time, and I also take the health snapshot on the Garmin watch to get HRV during the day at least once, and then I also take HRV with the Welltory app or the Welltory companion app on my Galaxy Watch on my measuring day, which is currently a Saturday. The Saturday is due to the fact that I like to think about beginning the week on Sunday, and so before I would like to have our measurements complete. So I'm kind of working toward the goal of measuring all things, and ideally they would have been better now on Saturday, and then I can start the week fresh and I don't have to pay attention to now measuring for 30 minutes in the morning. Actually, in the last routines, it sometimes took me anywhere from 40 to 45 minutes to measure all of these different things, and this was just a little bit too much time, so I have been trying to reduce this. What I reduced is a blood sugar measurement. Also, I did urine measurements, and the urine measurements don't have kind of a smart system which then recognizes kind of the interpretation. So I manually checked all of these boxes, but then also there is this interpretation going on. Sometimes it's not the same color, and so I do have an app in which you can tick the different colors. You can also record the images and then basically have the image in the app itself. But there is also no graph in this app, and there also the order of the items was also not the same in the app sometimes, and so it was not really valuable as in any interpretation. It probably would still be useful to look back on this data maybe years from now and to see, okay, when I ate this diet and when I had this VO2 max, my urine data was like this. But I also found that it is quite something. You have to have the container for the urine, and then you have to remember to get the urine in the container, and so on and so forth. So I left out the urine analysis, which I did on a weekly basis. I then had it in this app. This app was called Puri, and I also now have left out the Contour Next blood sugar measurement, which was only kind of a one-time measurement. So I did morning fasted glucose similar compared to getting basically resting or morning blood pressure, similar to getting resting heart rate. So because you are selecting this very, very narrow bandwidth of what the blood pressure and also the resting heart can be, so basically after having slept, so basically maximally regenerated, one could say, in the morning, at least ideally, one is basically taking this very small portion out of blood pressure that basically goes up and down, I think, through workouts and through not workouts. So therefore one has kind of a comparability to this data. So instead of blood pressure, one could call it kind of resting blood pressure. The same would be true for resting heart rate. If I took my resting heart rate sometimes during the workouts, sometimes after having eaten food, sometimes during the night, then it would be sometimes 38, for example. It was minimally in the last night, and maybe sometimes my sleeping heart rate goes down to 37 at least, as measured on the Garmin Index, not on the Garmin Index, but on the Garmin Phoenix 7S Pro. Now the next thing which I have in here are toe spreaders. I try to currently do them 10 minutes in a day, and so they should try to improve my posture of basically my feet and allow me to maybe then in the gym stand basically more upright. And so far I think this has been working. Also, I do notice that it has a slight improving effect whenever I run, so it takes a little bit of a couple of seconds maybe of my running times or of my running paces. So I did basically buy 4 of these, 2 pairs in a couple of months ago. Bryan Johnson does not particularly have those. I heard Peter Attia talk about toe spreaders. I also heard Andrew Huberman talk about toe spreaders. I think they are called toe spreaders. So these are just these things that go in between your toes, and then they kind of expand your toes. So think about your hand, and your hand might have been cramped in by a shoe for many years. And then what if you took your hand and you actually allowed it to spread out, and you also kind of forced it to spread out, similarly to how a posture correction, which I also have worn for multiple months straight apart from sleeping, also during workouts. So I had multiple ones of these which I exchanged, and similarly they kind of force you into a different pattern of behavior, which then also might to some extent rely on basically the force being constantly applied. So you actually then don't maybe build up the potential back muscles that then would hold your posture upright, because you are kind of relying on the posture correction, which then might not have the best impact. Similarly to how people wear these nose strips now, instead of just using their nose muscles basically in order to So basically, instead of using the muscles, and instead of trying to build up these muscles, they're now just using this constant thing that is kind of replacing the functionality that the muscles otherwise would have. One could also say this is similar to this, but then one is again forcing oneself into a different pattern of behavior, which could also be beneficial. Now, something else that Bryan Johnson does is that he has this red light cap, which I just kind of copy-pasted from him. I did not look into the particular studies or something like this. I did not look 10 papers and then I compared them. I just began to notice that my hairline was receding, and it was receding, and it was receding, and I had usually this kind of halo, which was kind of maybe a centimeter, which you could already see through to my skull. And I began taking minoxidil. I apply a fourth of the recommended daily doses of minoxidil every time I shower, so after I shower, and which is basically reducing the cost. Otherwise it would cost quite much. So what is recommended is that you have, I think, 1 gram in total of minoxidil, at least in terms of the bubble thing that comes out of the minoxidil. I am using Regain, but in other countries it is called Rogaine, not Joe Rogan though. And so I am using this, and I'm also using this red light cap. So Bryan Johnson has this one that has this strap that comes out of, or this cable that comes out, and he has this additional device. I got one which I have to charge maybe every couple of days, and it is this inlay which turns on. It also has a blue light mode, but I'm using the red light mode, and so it turns on, and then it's exactly 10 minutes. I think Bryan Johnson does 7 or 8 or something like this, but somebody already thought about this, and somebody already also thought about getting USB-C into this, so I can charge this via USB-C. This also came with a cap, which I had used for quite some time, but now this cap, I lost this cap, and so I recently got another cap, 2 or 3 euros from AliExpress, which is big enough such that it fits in. So you can take this, and then you have kind of this overlay here, which allows this to be kind of stored in there. With the previous caps I used, this was not so much the case, but with this one, which has a kind of a bigger diameter, this is again possible. So I'm using now one of these caps in order to just have this on. I found that it is just inducing so much more threshold to usage if I don't have this inlay in a cap all the time. Even if I have to charge it every couple of days, if I just have it like this and I just put it on in the morning, then for 10 minutes, and then it's done. And I don't know what the impact of this is. Of course, I cannot really isolate the variables. I have been taking minoxidil, as I mentioned, and also doing this. But additionally, I also have been doing microneedling, which is another part of Bryan Johnson's protocol. Also, Andrew Huberman talked a whole episode about hair loss, and he also talked about the different depths of microneedling. I got a pen which goes from I think 0.5 to 2 millimeters, and I tried to do the maximum, but then eventually I realized that the needles actually basically went down, so they degraded over time, and so what I actually was thinking was 2 millimeters was then basically almost nothing, maybe 0.1 millimeters, because the needles were just then degraded. And so I have been switching the needles, but then the device stopped working. So I had this pen, and I don't know where the pen exactly is, somewhere in my apartment, but it began to stop working, and because I got it from AliExpress, I now can no longer access my orders on there, and I also cannot contact the seller. It cost me 30 to 50 euros or something like this. This inlay cost, I think, 35 or 40 euros. So the Bryan Johnson cap is actually selling at a higher price, and also other caps that you might find, other red light caps and also blue light caps. I can actually also show you the blue light mode. I think it's by pressing twice. There is also, or no, you turn it on, and then there is also a mode that is switching between both. The blue light seems to be more kind of a stimulating thing, but well, I don't know about the blue light. I have only heard about the red light and its potential stimulating effect for hair growth. So I think this is also kind of a reasonable way to rely on these heuristics. So somebody else is testing this, and then I'm just copy pasting it, and if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. But if it does work, then I am potentially getting, so if I think about my hairline at a certain age, then I potentially get so I'm basically extending my hairline that I currently have into my age. So at age 30, I then might have the hairline which I otherwise would already have had at age 28, for example. So I'm basically thinking about this as potentially extending the hairline I still have, my somewhat youthful hairline, to basically an older age by doing a couple of things that have been somewhat reasonably tested. And if I then trust somebody, of course it doesn't make sense. Of course I should look into this. But realistically, how many hours can I spend reading papers about this one particular device, and how many hours can I read about blood pressure, for example? I am very interested, I would say, in this, but this is not my job, and so I'm only trying the best to kind of keep my body at a high function. Then the next device is something that I just also bought. Bryan Johnson has the exact same device, even though I spray painted it black. This is the Mir Smart One. There is also a device that instead of having this just being a dummy, it has this with an oximeter. So the oximeter allows to track your blood oxygenation, but this is also something that is the Galaxy Watch is doing continuously, as well as the Garmin Watch is doing continuously. So if I have the continuous measurements, I don't need it on there. In the beginning I thought there was also some kind of something else that was different to this. Now this cost 109 or 119 euros, also quite expensive, similarly to how this was also quite expensive. This I think cost 179 euros. So the Omron Evolve cost 119 euros, I think, and then I actually recently sold the Omron Evolve, I think, for 114 or 15 or 20 euros even. So I only paid basically 5 to 10 euros for using it for now more than 12 months, which I think was a quite reasonable deal. I put it on and I was not too much reliant on it. I often figured that because of the higher variability of this device and less reliability of this device, I actually might still use the old device, but then I did not have the data in Garmin. And now I am kind of betting on Garmin being the one health platform in which I can kind of lead all of the different health data strings together. To a certain extent, Samsung fulfills also this role in the maybe with the next version of the Galaxy Watch, maybe the 7 series, maybe the 8 series, Samsung might introduce something that is then blood glucose tracking. Has been rumored for years. The same would be true for the Apple Watch. I think Steve Jobs already has thought about blood glucose with the Apple Watch, but thus far nobody has cracked the reliability of blood glucose tracking, I think, on a smartwatch. Just how cool this would be if you continuously could track blood glucose. But of course, maybe this is just, not of course, but maybe it is just an issue of time and increasing technological advancement until something like this is possible, and you can wear two watches like these and then also track your blood glucose and maybe also other parameters. Maybe you can track your testosterone continuously and not just have this one sample that might be skewed by you having done this thing in like 2 days ago. For example, I took a blood draw. In the blood draw I did a sprint workout before, and the sprint workout was quite intense, so as intense as I could have gone in my eyes. And so I did have quite high liver values afterwards, which I think to a certain extent might also have been caused. This was kind of one thinking. I then asked my doctor about this, and she meant that it probably didn't have that much of an impact. And recently I heard Dr. Gabriel Lyon talk on the Huberman Lab podcast about this exact issue, where if you did something very intensely before, your ALT as well as other liver markers, so this would be GT, gamma GGT or gamma GT, as well as AST, would probably be elevated afterwards. And because I did this only 2 hours before, this might have been partially why I had such high liver markers. And then maybe the next blood draw, so I had multiple ones specifically for the liver markers, and the blood draw I uploaded to Inside Tracker, or that I did specifically for Inside Tracker, and also to get the Inside Tracker age, which now also is kind of my version of getting a age output from my blood results. As I mentioned, I don't know if Bryan Johnson uses Inside Tracker, but I assume he does. Bryan Johnson also did this DNA methylation test, which seems to be kind of it seems to not be scientific gold standard for basically getting your age. There also seem to be multiple generations already of this test, which is called the Dundon Age Pace test, and he recently, I think, achieved in the latest test a 0.64 or something like this, which means already that he is getting about a third of the year kind of for free, which is such a nice idea. So if you think about the 24 hours, then you would not age basically for 1/3 already of the day. Compared to me, with an Inside Tracker age of 36, this is already quite different. So now the next device. So first of all, this here does not sync to the cloud. It only syncs to an app, which is the Mir Smart One app. There are also multiple apps available because these devices are also for people with, so basically for practitioners, and so you could also potentially use this, and there are also multiple software solutions for the iPad and also maybe for other Android devices. So I did look through all of the apps, and then there was one that stood out. It does not synchronize to the cloud though, and so once I switch the phone, the data might be lost, which might be a big issue. This does two things. It measures FEV1 as well as peak expiratory flow. Peak expiratory flow, I actually already had some data because I had kind of a seasonal asthma as I was a child and had kind of pollen allergy, and this was introduced to a certain extent. So I already had this device at home, or a similar device, kind of the old devices that were not smart. What I'm now doing is I'm blowing 3 times into this device, and then it measures both FEV1, which I think, so 1 is basically how much volume, so it measures for 1 second, and the 1 is the peak expiratory flow, which is then output in liters, and the other is liters per second or something like this. So my predicted value for the peak expiratory flow would be around 600, I think, and I have been always below this. So my lung function, at least measured in peak expiratory flow, is kind of below this, and the other value is measuring something a little bit different. I read multiple times through the articles, but I cannot remember exactly what it is. Bryan Johnson has the exact same device and seemingly probably does then the exact same thing. Circumference measurements are something that I have been doing already a couple of years ago. I then inserted or input the data into an Excel spreadsheet. Now I'm using an app called FeelFit, and I basically measure my neck as well as my arms. I also sometimes have measured my underarms, but in the current app I'm using the FeelFit app, which is the app from my previous scale. I can input not my underarms, and also the more things you do, I also sometimes measured my wrist in order to have kind of a marker for body composition, which would be an actual marker and not just something that is bioimpedance. And this, I think, would be, so your wrists as well as your ankles are basically bone, as well as basically a little bit of blood vessels, and then there is no muscle, or there is the least amount of muscle, I think. And so if you measure something like this, then you always are confounding basically muscle as well as fat. And here you don't have muscles, or the muscles go basically on, there are only tendons, I think, down there. There are actually not many muscles in there. So this would be potentially a way to actually get proper body composition measurement. The thinner the wrists, the better probably the body composition, or the less fat you would have. Now, because of this, I partially also measured my wrists. I don't know whether Bryan Johnson does the circumference measurements, but I think it is somewhat of a reasonable thing. Now the problem is, so there are 2 different modes of measuring body circumference. The first would be the basically if the muscle belly is contracted, and the second one would be just in a resting state. Now, the problem, I think, with either one of both, or the problem with the resting, is that if I now measure my biceps, and my biceps is, due to me being 20% body fat, just bigger, well, then it's not actually my biceps, but my upper arm in total, which is bigger. But then if I measure this, then it's bigger. So the bigger number does not necessarily correlate with better health in this case. And so having the contracted measurement would on the other side allow me to at least have a kind of a bigger proportion of the muscle being represented in this. So my upper arm, if it is bigger, would then to a certain extent more correlate with basically better health of at least my upper arm muscle and more muscle size in my upper arm. The same would be true for the thighs, for example. If you measure your thighs on the thickest area, then this could be due to, so the thigh could be bigger due to fat, but also due to the thigh actually being bigger because you trained for now 12 years or 15 years or something like this, and then actually you have bigger thighs. So I still take circumference. Of course, you then have to take into account some kind of body composition measurement in order to evaluate this, but also the proportions of these different measurements to each other can kind of tell. So there is the waist to chest ratio, and there is also the waist to hip ratio, which is basically the thickest area, basically around your hip, and then you also have this area, which is your waist, and then the proportion of these two, which is in my case usually 0.8 or 0.81, is then kind of telling you something about the content or the distribution of fat. If you have more visceral fat, which would be the abdominal fat, which would be stored inside, compared to the subcutaneous fat, then this would be less beneficial for your health. So this is also something that is then calculated in the FeelFit app, but also in other apps, such as the additional measurements I do in the gym, which I will shortly discuss. So this has been the second iteration of this device. I also previously tried the Renpho Smart Circumference Tape, but this after a couple of days began to not work and to begin to be defunct. Now, a problem is that the FeelFit app is no longer working that particularly great, so I switched to Renpho in order to connect the same scale, but then now I have the Garmin scale, and so it doesn't make sense to step on multiple scales in a day, and so I kind of just discontinued stepping on the other scale. Actually now have it at my parents' place, which then maybe I visit for Christmas, and then we do a metabolic winter games thing where the scale turns out a metabolic age, and we all can compete with aging rates, which is an idea I had, and so far they have not expelled me from the family for this, so maybe I might actually then do this. I also thought maybe getting 2 other markers. So the one would be metabolically, the other one would be a cardiorespiratory marker, but since my parents, for example, don't want to measure, they want to wear trackers, and they also don't have trackers, the only way to measure something like VO2 max, for example, in order to use it as a cardiorespiratory marker, or the second best would be resting heart rate. Resting heart rate cannot really be measured. So what my idea was is that the Omron Evolve I still had, I would have basically one measurement, which then would allow me to record blood pressure, and the second one would allow me to record resting heart rate. Now, of course, the resting heart rate then would not really be resting heart rate, as if determined by a Garmin device that I wore for a year, then the resting heart rate average for a given year is probably more telling compared to having this resting heart rate once measured on Christmas. But on the other side, it's better probably than no data. So I would have the cardiorespiratory fitness covered with resting heart rate, and from the resting heart rate, at least in this given instance, you then calculate a VO2 max. So I would have kind of a VO2 max estimate by this way, just by measuring blood pressure, which takes maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then stepping on the scale, I would have a metabolic age output. So I would have the metabolic age covered, the cardiorespiratory covered, and then the additional thing, which also takes only minimal time, would be the grip strength. I do think Bryan Johnson has the exact same device, not the identical device, but kind of the same device. So this is kind of the standard device, I think. It sells on Amazon for around 50 euros. It sells on AliExpress in this case for... I actually did not get the one on AliExpress, I only saw it later on. And this measures your grip strength. As I mentioned, this seems to be kind of the standard device. It looks like this, and so if you kind of getting this, you're probably good to go. So I also didn't see that much difference. There are a couple of other designs, but I wanted this one because it was kind of just totally black. Now, this you can charge with micro USB, and you also have internal batteries, which you can also use rechargeable batteries with, which is kind of nice to have kind of these 2 modes of powering this device. Now, in the beginning, I lacked kind of interpretation for my results. Now there is an app called Grip Meter, which allows you to input your results and to also get an age output, at least if you are over the age of 40, I think. So if you just say, okay, I'm over the age of 40, then you can potentially get a biological age output, which you again can put into your Excel in my case, or I can put in my Excel and then calculate maybe an average or have different weights attributed to the different age markers I am getting out of this. I have been tracking this in the beginning daily, but then this is kind of a high psychological cost, I think, because it's quite hard to actually take all of your strength. And what I've also been thinking is, so it's quite hard to take all of your strength and then to measure this daily. But what I've also been thinking is that this is kind of also, to a certain extent, mental readiness. So it also is my body. How ready is my body in the morning, really? So I, of course, can have my sleep score, but the sleep score is maybe 70 here, and then it's 80 here, or something like this. So there is already kind of a difference, which also, because I have these 2 devices, is kind of different. Bryan Johnson uses the Whoop in order to get his HRV measurements, but also other measurements as well. And he also uses a Polar watch for tracking his workouts, as far as I know. He also has the Polar strap, which then does an ECG, I think, again. And I can do an ECG on both of these devices, and I did not get a strap until now, mostly for the reason that, first of all, it costs, and second of all, I think it would, if I would have this additional option, that every time I go for a run, I could also wear this strap additionally. Of course, this would be more data. It would also be maybe be a little bit more accurate, but what it also would do is it would increase the threshold. If I go for a run, and instead of just having these watches on me all the time, and ideally also charged apart from when I'm working at my desk and I'm charging them twice a day, I then have to take my workout clothes. I then have to maybe think about the outside temperature. I then maybe have to think about which shoes I want to wear. I then might have to think about, do I want to listen to something? I then might have to think about, do I want to wear the strap, which additionally takes a couple of seconds. What if then the strap isn't charged, and so on and so forth. By reducing the decision variables, I'm making it likelier to go onto a run. This has been a big part of my recent thinking, at least in a couple of areas, to reduce the decision variables that are necessary. For example, if I every time I go to the gym have to decide whether I run to the gym or I drive with the bike, then this reduces basically the likelihood that in a given situation, with a scheduled workout, I then go to the gym, because it's just more complicated to go through the computation of then arriving at the gym. So all the different decisions are just more complicated because there are more decision variables. So by reducing them, by saying, okay, at this time I always go with the bike to the gym. During this could be in the morning up until the evening. If I don't make it until the evening, then I usually run to the gym. But then what if it's winter? And what if I want to run in a tank top and shorts, because otherwise I would have to carry lots of clothes, and then I go outside and then it's very cold, and then the cold kind of prevents me, and I'm already cold because I fasted all day, and so on and so forth. So back to Grip Meter. The Grip Meter app now allows me to have this readout. It also allows me to kind of have a graph, and it also gives me an average readout for both of these, and it also gives me then a percentile readout. Currently I think I'm in the 13.6 percentile, but on the lower end and not on the 80 or 90th percentile. Grip strength can be used as a proxy for basically muscle health, and seems to also correlate to a certain extent with other markers as well, such as I think depression is kind of linked to grip strength also, and a couple of other things as well. So measuring this I think is kind of useful. Bryan Johnson also does this. Bryan Johnson I think has a dominant hand measurement of 58 or something like this. The highest I got was a 57, but usually I'm averaging way lower. And also looking at this, I can kind of see I have a standardized measurement for my strength, which if I go to the gym, there might be so many other things. Maybe I change the exercise order, and if I do bench press first and then this other thing afterwards, then I have these two things that are kind of very similar, the bench press but also the overhead press, and then I might have less of a value in the overhead press, and if I do squats before I do the leg press, and so on and so forth. So having this and doing it once a week, kind of rested, even though I usually work out the day before, then I do resistance training the day before, so this might be potentially higher if I measured on a Sunday, but I decided for now that I measure on a Saturday morning. Then we have this left, and then also I have the medical thermometer left. I don't know if Bryan Johnson measures his sublingual temperature, but I got this thermometer and I decided I would at least record kind of a baseline data array, which then would allow me to, whenever I have fever or something like this, to go back to this baseline data and say, okay, my average for the last couple of weeks has been this. Usually it's around 30, 35 to maybe 36 or something like this. In between 34.5 and 36 is usually in my case. So I just have this additionally. But I think I'm also discontinuing this because it takes a little bit of time. And there's also the risk of getting basically the measurement kind of messed up if you don't have it completely to the back of your tongue. So it's sublingual, which means it goes into your mouth and to the back of your tongue. But here I also kind of have a continuous measurement right now, which is that the Garmin Fenix 7S Pro measures skin temperature. With the Galaxy Watch, I think it has been introduced in the 5 or in the 6 series, maybe in the 5, but in the 6 for sure. So you get it also as a kind of readout for sleep and also for cycle tracking. The same is true for cycle tracking on the Garmin side, but on the Garmin side you get a deviation from baseline temperature in the sleep. You can potentially also get a readout of this. So the Glance Pro watch face I am using is also giving me a readout. So I do have this secondary screen on Glance Pro Dual. So this is basically another screen which allows me to have a set of markers on here. And what this allows me to do is to judge. So my body battery is currently at 5%. If it's at 5% or lower, I'm probably likely to be able to sleep, but only if my skin temperature, and this is what this measures. So instead of sublingual temperature, I can now measure continuously my skin temperature. I just don't have a readout as of now in Garmin. Maybe Garmin already collects the data and then maybe in the future shows up with skin temperature. It seemingly already records the data, at least at night, but it of course would be so useful if I, for example, could say, okay, I ate this much curd and this has this much milk sugar in it, and then I can see how my body temperature rose. And I could maybe correlate my body temperature, and even if I don't have blood glucose data, I could say, okay, at least my body heat increased, or my skin temperature increased, which seems to be the case if I eat too much milk sugar, for example, also from whey protein, even if the whey protein only has 4 grams per 100 grams. It seems to be the case that if I eat too much sugar and also carbs in total, but only very specific kinds of carbs, that my body temperature increases, at least in summer, or my skin temperature increases up to 33 degrees Celsius. But if I want to go to sleep and I want to have basically a good skin temperature for going to sleep, then I am usually trying to be at least below 30 degrees Celsius, otherwise I can kind of forget that I will be sleeping. So currently I have 32.2 and I have 2 hours of regeneration time, and well, I just put a couple of things on here, and the other things is respiratory rate, and then I also have my usual display, which I am thinking of what if I could have... So Bryan Johnson has this idea of getting the aging rate down. Now I could not have displayed my aging rate on here, and the question is also how would I have all of these age markers kind of resulted, and then if you do one of these methylation tests, what frequency is then, and what other variables do you then kind of take into account. So currently I have this Inside Tracker test scheduled once a year. Inside Tracker is now also a subscription, which means if you pay the 159 or 49 for the blood upload a year, which is resulting in a little bit more than 10 euros, maybe 12 or 13 euros a month in my case, and then additionally I have to pay the blood draw. So if I would have the whole blood draw panel, which would be all the 43 or 44 markers, which would be acceptable, which would be for males, then it would cost me... I recently basically got a quote from a laboratory, and it would cost me 280 euros around this. And this would be the cost plus the cost of Inside Tracker. Previously, Inside Tracker, if you wanted the additional age calculation, it cost additionally, I think, 40 to 70 euros or something like this, depending on also the discount you get. Now, they still offer other plans, but that's not what I am concerned with, so I currently think that it is the most reasonable to either have the minimum amount of biomarkers for the inside age calculation, which in the last blood draw cost me I think 70 euros, but I also made a mistake where I had an additional parameter which I didn't need from basically a different set for the calculation, and so this would have cost me actually 60 euros or 55 euros plus the blood upload plus the Inside Tracker. And so now the cost would be 149 as it sells right now for the blood, for the subscription for Inside Tracker on a yearly basis, and then the Inside Tracker age now does not cost anything additional, and the other cost would be the blood draw actually. And so I decided, I think for now, that I would have this at a yearly basis, because quarterly and monthly would be too high, and then I also could not do the full panel obviously, because 280 euros every month is just a little bit high in cost. And so instead of now getting the methylation test, which I think, so it seems to be the standard, but also if the standard kind of changes over time, there are already different generations of this clock, which is called Dundon aging test or something like this. And then also in which part of the season do you take it. So for the Inside Tracker blood draw, I decided this would be the end of the year, similar to how Saturday would be just at the end of the week. And so I have decided now this would be the end of December until I go off for Christmas basically. And so in terms of cost now, the blood methylation test would begin at around 200 euros or something like this. Then I would get basically one aging rate per year. But what I would still miss is the blood data. So if I can get 46 blood markers plus an age, then I can calculate the average aging rate with basically taking the biological age divided by my chronological age, which gives me an average aging rate. This also includes now kind of just the average aging rate. So this is kind of a bigger thing. Similarly to how with VO2 max or also with resting heart rate at least, it I think makes sense to take a look at the yearly resting heart rate instead of the resting heart rate from the last day where I ate maybe this and then I slept like this and so on and so forth. And the same would be true for maybe the weight. What if I just take the yearly average instead of now optimizing for the single weigh-in at the gym next week, where I then don't drink before and I also don't eat before because I want to get the weight as low as possible and then have a crappy workout after because I was not fueled properly and hydrated properly. What if instead I take a look at the monthly or even the yearly average? So whenever this is possible, I think it makes sense, at least if it makes sense for the specific metric, that I then take the yearly measurement. And so instead of now spending a little bit of money for the methylation test, which I would be very interested in, I think it makes more sense to get basically an inside age calculation, which is maybe a little bit similar to the other thing, and maybe not the same thing Bryan Johnson does, but additionally I get 46 blood markers. So it's the raw data instead of a readout already. And so if I get the raw data updated in my current position of health, which is, I would say, still somewhat reasonable, then I have the data itself, and I don't have just one number, which then I don't know what goes into this. But with Inside Tracker, I do have the different parameters and how they impacted inside age, and then I also get recommendations. Bryan Johnson talks about this idea of what if an algorithm determined basically what you are doing in terms of health. And part of this might be diet and nutrition. And nutrition now already to a certain extent, I basically am running already a prototype of this. So with the last blood draw, Inside Tracker gave me food recommendations. I then took all of these food recommendations and said the following. With the following constraint, I said, okay, what if I take all of the food recommendations that I can get into a powdered form, and then I have in one meal shake in the beginning of the day. And so I have been basically getting all of these different products, and now I have been doing this for now a couple of weeks and months actually already. And so part of my nutrition is already determined by Inside Tracker, which I think is quite something this is a working prototype. Bryan Johnson made his blueprint diet, but it's a kind of a cookie cutter diet. It's okay, this works for most people, but this here, Inside Tracker, basically it gives me the readout of the age, which means that I don't have to spend additional money on the methylation test, which might also evolve over time, whereas Inside Tracker updates it as they see fit, and then I can also see the historic data in there. So basically I am relying on a system instead of doing this on my own in Excel, and therefore once I change the definitions because I read this other paper, or this person said this and Peter Attia said this, then I change it again. Then I don't have the stability, similar to how with the circumference measurements in the beginning, I measured my upper arm, for example, contracted, whereas now I don't measure it contracted because the app tells me to not. And so I'm relying on the app and also on basically all of the different implications or all of the different thoughts that went into the design of the app. And so by relying on these different things, I'm thinking about I can put together a system out of different plugins, and because someone smart, ideally, thought about, or someone just thought about this and put this together, so therefore there's already some knowledge implied into this, and by then using something like this, similar to how we're using just this Garmin device and then letting Garmin interpret their blood data, then gives me the readout. Or gives me basically, saves me from the knowledge. Of course, there could be an optimization to be had, but the main optimization I think is the time optimization I can make. And so, Inside Tracker seems to be something that's reasonable, and so I'm not doing a methylation test as of now, even though if I could, of course, maybe I would do like 20 tests and also do lots of other things. But of course, finances is something that impacts this, and I already got all of these devices. Now, in total, this cost 119 euros. This cost 179 euros, I think, but I also replaced the previous version of it, so I resold the other device which I previously had, which cost me 125, and I resold it again for 115 or 120. This cost 50, but on AliExpress you can get it for 35. This costs 3 euros on Amazon, but I got the previous version which then broke, so this tore off, and this did cost then on AliExpress I think only 3 euros or something like this. The previous version cost 8 euros or something like this on Amazon, because higher margin, because someone already imported the device. This here I basically got for free in the house collection, it just was there. And this here cost I think around 36 euros or something like this. The cap cost 3 euros, and that's mostly all of the different things I have been using. The blood glucose monitor I have cost I think 30 to 40 euros. The stripes cost 52 euros a year if I have, so you get this package and there are 52 in them I think, so if I do them once yearly, or actually I think it cost me 50 cents per day, so the whole package cost 26 euros, and so there were 52 stripes in it, or 50 stripes in it, so if I would take a blood glucose measurement on a weekly basis, then it would cost me 50 cents additionally to the fixed fee I had to pay for the device once, which I think was 30 to 40 euros. A blood glucose monitor, a continuous one, would cost, in my case, if I would get them for a whole month with Dexcom. So Bryan Johnson also did blood glucose monitor. I don't know specifically with which company, but he has a discount link for Levels, I think. Maybe also for another company. Huberman also has a discount code for Levels, but Levels also has not only the blood data, but they also do kind of some advisory thing in addition to just giving you the data. So kind of just some, you also pay basically for the service of interpreting this data for you. So there are also a couple of other companies. NutraSense, I think it is called, another company. There are also some companies that only give you for a certain, so basically for a whole year you would only for a certain time get blood glucose monitoring devices. So usually it's this thing you put in the back of your, so basically into your triceps, and then it, I think only well, there is this needle that goes in, and then there is this filament that goes in, and it only approximates, I think, blood glucose by doing something else, which I now can't remember. Now, additionally, I do at the gym a couple of measurements. So first of all, I try to track my workouts, but in the last couple of weeks I didn't, mostly because I do track them with the web login on Garmin. And this has also been part of switching to the Garmin watch, that I can track my weight lifts in there. I previously used an app called Strong, and previously before this I used an Excel spreadsheet, but this was just too complicated. The threshold was just too high. I did sometimes try to have my phone during the workout already. I also try to take handwritten notes, but my workout needs to be just working out, and I cannot stand around, because as soon as I stand around I get into this mode of, okay, now let's just wait a little bit longer and a little bit longer, and so I don't get the workout done. Now, with the measurements I do at the gym, I previously quarterly had scheduled one in-body measurement because you had to make an appointment. Now it's self-service, so I do have an app at the gym which is called eGym. So the eGym is a company that makes smart gym machines, and on these machines you can, so in total there are 9 machines as of now, I think, or maybe 10 already, and on these machines you can first of all train based on your 1 rep max test, and you can also do the 1 rep max test. Then the app accumulates this data, so there are 4 different ages. The first one is strength age, mostly based on these 1 rep max tests you can do at the machines. You can also input your manual sets, so if you want to do a bench press set and input it into the app, the algorithm takes this into account and calculates an overall strength age. The cardiovascular age takes into account blood pressure. What I took there is the weekly average, not the weekly, but the yearly average eventually. Previously I used the monthly average, but I eventually took the yearly average. But now Garmin as well as Samsung Health do not longer give a readout of the average, they just have a range. So previously the Omron Evolve app used to read out an average, but now I don't have longer, I still have the data in there, but since I am not using the Omron Evolve, previously Samsung still had the readout for the average, which I could use to basically have it in there and to then base the calculation on this. But now Samsung Health also updated and has the same scheme with the ranges, similar to Garmin Connect. It seems to also be not that useful to have kind of just a morning blood pressure if you then do additional measurements in the day, and then the average does not tell you much. But because blood pressure as of now is just blood pressure, it is not this, it doesn't have these distinctions between minimum heart rate, for example, during sleep, resting heart rate, basically being awake and resting, and then maximum heart rate, for example. And so the average would be similar to the average of heart rate, which does not tell you much. So if you have a very low resting heart rate but do also kind of hard workouts, then these might cancel each other out. Then if it goes up and down, it maybe does not tell you the most about your state of health. So maybe this is a step into the right direction, but this also now means that I lack the blood pressure input. I thought about maybe just setting it on standard to 120/80, which is kind of the standard optimal thing. Mine is usually below this, so I'm thinking about maybe just setting to 120/80, and therefore basically excluding the blood pressure from this calculation. The next thing which you input into the cardiorespiratory age or cardiovascular age in eGym is the VO2 max. So I do get my VO2 max updated once a week if I do my weekly run, and then my Garmin VO2 max estimate updates, and then I input it once weekly into this eGym app. In addition, there is the metabolic age. Previously I would use my bioimpedance scale at home, and I would take the body fat as well as the weight once a week and input it. There is no automatic input, even though the app itself connects to Garmin. It only imports the activity data, which it is, I think, not used for the bio age calculation, but only for other readouts, such as how active are you against the other gym members. And there, you also get points, and you get different levels in terms of activity, how active you were, but these are not related, I think, to the bio age. So it would be useful, I think, if there was an integration that would automatically put in blood pressure and then would interpret this data if I take this on a daily basis. Additionally, maybe in the next couple of years, Garmin might come out with continuous blood pressure measurement, and maybe also Galaxy or Samsung comes out with continuous blood pressure measurement, which would be really interesting to see. Now, the third factor rather is, so we have already, just for myself now, the strength age, we have the metabolic age, then we have the metabolic age, so we have the cardiorespiratory age, which are already covered, so we are currently discussing the metabolic age. there is this in-body scale which synchronizes to the app, and so I have switched from the scale I used at home, which usually has a body fat percentage which is 5 or 4 to, let's say, 7 or 8% higher compared to the one that I have at the gym. I suspect mostly this is because in the gym the scale has handles, whereas at home it doesn't, and maybe my lower body has a higher body fat percentage compared to my upper body, and so the scale at home thinks that I have more fat, but it doesn't take into account that I have not that much fat in the upper body, as the current is basically going through the least resistance, which would be just my legs at home, and then in the gym additionally my upper body is also measured, and then a composite of both body composition values is probably calculated, which is then reducing basically the overall calculated body fat percentage. Now at the gym currently I'm at anywhere from 7 to 11%. At home I am currently on a now yearly average at 16.1% on the Garmin Index S2. Now, of course, this goes up and down, and also it seems to be impacted by how much lotion I use for basically moisturizing my body and also the soles of my feet. And if I have, I think, more fat on my feet from the lotion, then it is reducing how much body fat percentage is calculated. Also maybe a potential error, of course also the humidity might play a role, and so on and so forth. And so the metabolic age as of now is based on the gym, so by basically switching to the gym and by having 6% body fat less or up to 8% body fat less, I was able to reduce my metabolic age in the gym to now 22. So I'm only 1 year away from the ideal gym age in terms of the metabolic age of 21 actually, and the same is true for the other ages. So I am currently biologically at the EGM age 24, my strength age is 30, and I stopped doing basically the other manual inputs because I couldn't figure out scheduling this on a routine basis, because I am doing an additional resistance training or circuit workout, but it doesn't make sense to include all of the exercises that would also be calculated or be included into the strength age. So I'm just basing this on the 6 machines that are available in my gym, but there is also a bigger selection which is available in a higher tier or higher priced gym, which would be the 9 machines or even 10 machines, which would be quite interesting. And also, whenever I do these exercises, I notice that they take me kind of out of my comfort zone, but I'm usually now doing just a 1 rep max test. So I step on the in-body scale, I then do these 6 1 rep max tests, and that's then the strength age. Then the cardiovascular age I update with all the markers I have, but in the future maybe no longer the other marker. Then the other marker would be blood pressure. The metabolic age is the in-body measurement, in addition to circumference measurements, which is the waist as well as the hip, and I input these also manually after basically I take these measurements. And then the 4th age is a flexibility age. It consists out of 5 tests, so this could be how much your neck stretches to the one side, then the other side. The next one is you take a stick and bend it basically behind the back. The next one is lat, basically to both sides, and then you have 2 additional ones, which the first one you have to do like this and basically measure the hamstring stretch or flexibility, and the second one is how far you can go back, and then you have a stick and you go like this. So here my age is also 21, which is not also 21. So 21 for flexibility, then I have 22 for metabolic age. Recently I actually hit a kind of record low in terms of my weight, but then I did in this case not in the morning measure myself at the gym, so I figured maybe if I did this and I would have gone to the gym earlier on the Saturday, then I would have gotten maybe a 21, but I didn't. I continued to work, and so I only got it later on. And of course now, over the course of the day, your weight goes up and down, at least my weight goes up and down, sometimes up to 5 kilograms, depending on how much vegetables and so on I eat and how much I drink. So I had basically a higher value, which then, resulted in again 22. Then I have the age, the strength age of 30, and then I have a cardiovascular age, which I think is 23 and has been 23. In order to reach a biological age, so the next lower one, I think need to reduce all of the ages to 21. So basically the 2 additional ones from 24, I can't remember as of now the different values. So 23 for the cardiovascular, I would have to reduce this by 2. I don't know if I would increase my VO2 max to the next estimate, which I'm close, so 58 would be the next one. And so if I would hit the next one here, my resting heart rate is for the yearly average 49 currently. I already had 48 on a yearly average on the Garmin device, so this is the marker I can pull down. The next one is the VO2 max. I'm a couple of weeks away from, I think, reaching the 58. I'm currently at 57.4, so the next one would be rounding up, and so this would result in the 58, which I then could put in. So maybe this already reduces this. And my strength age seems to not improve that much, and it also has not changed that much. Sometimes I have a particular good day, and then I'm kind of on the upper limit. The values are always replaced with the most recent ones. There seem to be no rolling average or something like this going on, at least in terms of the strength age. I talked with a sales rep, basically, who was present at the gym once, and he told me that this would be the process, which would be basically not taking into account the older values, but only the most recent one. Now, this total results in a biological age of 24. If I wanted to get to 23, I would have to reduce all of the ages apart from the strength age to 21, and I think then I would hit the next threshold. The ages themselves are calculated 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, so they each count 1 in they each have a weight of 1. So basically, by taking the normal average, you would then have the result, I think. So maybe it's slightly different, but I did take basically this calculation, and I just calculated the average, and it was kind of the same result. Of course, there is a rounding going on. So one of my goals has been, or it seems like a reasonable goal, to try to hit the 21 in the EGM age. The next steps would be resting heart rate again 48, VO2 max 58, the blood pressure I have to probably take out, the strength age I probably might not be able to improve that much. I have been taking creatine, I probably will not take anything else which might have a similar impact compared to creatine. My sleep has been somewhat reasonable. Maybe I can have a couple of more points in improving my sleep score if I would take sleep score as a proxy for health, but apart from this I probably am not able to improve then my strength age this much. So maybe the maximum I am at least able to get to without, I mean, I have been training since age 11 or 12, doing resistance training 3 times a week, and also I would say somewhat reasonably, apart from injury. And so currently I'm doing kind of this 4th day, and so how much will I get my strength age down if I'm already, in this case now, 15 years or more into training, almost 16 years into training with resistance training. So I don't know whether there is much room for basically improvement. Maybe I should have a different mindset. Yeah, well, maybe not. So EGM is currently 24. In terms of, I have these different age markers now. The question is, of course, how to relate them to each other. I think EGM is kind of the most important one. So taking all of Bryan Johnson's fitness tests, for example, and applying them to myself. I did try to do the stretching test, the YMCA stretching test or something like this. But now I have this all standardized. I have this all in this app. Of course, if I switch the gym, this might be different. But I have basically all of fitness combined in this app. Garmin also calculates a fitness age, which is in my case 18, which is very nice. But it also only takes into account body composition, resting heart rate, and activity minutes or intensity minutes. So it's only based on these 3 factors. But if it would also take into account my blood data, then it would probably result in a higher age. Of course, and now I could say, okay, this accounts 1, this accounts 1. I also did a face age analysis, which was available on one website I saw online, and this resulted in me being, I don't know, something 30 or higher, maybe 35 or something like this. I also have these wrinkles already, these crow's feet, which appear on the side of my face, and I think but this has been like this to a certain extent since age 18, 19. Mostly I think this is due to pollen allergy, because, well, I have been rubbing through my entire childhood, or for many hours during summer at least, I have been rubbing my eyes often, and again and again and again. So there might be a deterioration effect. And I also often sleep on my face, which then might kind of wrinkle the skin during sleeping. But maybe it's also genetic. Maybe I should wear more moisturizer, I don't know. In total, I have 37 inside tracker age from last December. I have the 24 now, the EGM age, and I have the Garmin age. I could, for example, just focus on these 3, and then my average age out of all of these 3 would be 26.3, which would be about a year younger than I currently am, or maybe a little bit more than a year. But one problem is that in EGIM, the maximum age is maximum rejuvenated is 21. Garmin says it's 18. Strength, I often heard, seems to be increasing up until age 30 or something like this. So if you are compounding strength training, then you might still basically decrease your strength age. So the Garmin fitness age, since it is mostly cardiovascular, it makes sense to kind of leave it out of the equation, since the cardiovascular age is also calculated in EGIM. So if I do take EGIM age as well as the Inside Tracker age from last December, then I would be 30.5, which is about 4 years, no, actually 3 years older than I would be chronologically. And now if I divide this year, which would be my biological age, by my chronological age, then I get an average aging rate for my entire life, which I think is a somewhat useful metric compared to the methylation test, for example, that only kind of takes into account maybe the last couple of months, maybe also more. I am not entirely sure about this. Maybe I should read up a little bit about this. So if I take the 30.5 and I divide it by my current chronological age, which of course is also maybe not that precise if you round up to full years, but let's just take it like this, then I would have an average aging rate of 12% higher compared to the normal, which would be 1.0. So I'm basically aging 12% faster than what would be normal, and I would have an aging rate of 1.129, so actually more closer to 1.13.